Hello, welcome back. Recently, my father asked me to write a short story about a character he had invented named Elyonna. She is very beautiful and very famous, but she is nonchalant about her beauty and her fame. He didn't have any requests beyond that, so I had a lot of latitude to write whatever I wanted, and I did. Today I'm going to read that short story to you. It is called The Dragon of Mount Lore. Pargon was aflame. Elyonna watched the conflagration from the bow of her star-hewn ship at anchor in the Bay of Frogs. The last crown on the sun set on pillars of smoke. The moon emerged, ashamed, her face in shadow. Hot wind dried the tears on Elyanna's cheeks. Skyborn, said Maru, her new equerry. The dragon goes east. Her den is in Rulera, at the peak of Mount Lore. Elyonna turned to regard Maru. He hadn't been with her long. He was small and slight for an Oron, but no less beautiful than others of his kind in the Silverlands. He wore a green gem at his throat and rubies in his pointed ears. A short way, Elyonna said, but dangerous. She put her hand on Maru's shoulder. In the firelit dark, he looked too young to see such horror. His eyes were still honest. I erred, Maru, she said. I trusted Balgora all those years ago, after the Seven Rivers War. She promised, and I believed her. Now, Maladar. Now, Pargon. The blood of two kingdoms is on me. Never, your beauty, Maru replied. This evil is Balgora's alone to pay for. You will never dim in the world's eyes, no matter how many kingdoms burn. Elyonna took this like a punch in the stomach. Her gut ached to see Maru's blind faith. Death like this should weigh more than beauty, Maru, she said. You know my last equerry died for me. She was eager to do it. I am not a myth. If you wish to honor me, see my humanity. Treat me like a person, like the dead of Pargon and Maladar. I am one of you. Maru nodded, apparently unsure how to contradict a living legend. Though she hurt, Elyonna could only forgive him. She had always hurt alone. Maru would never understand. At first light, Elyanna's party rode into Tear Spring Forest. Young Maru's sword was too keen to fly from its sheath. He swore and prayed as they slipped through the green half-light, promising personal vengeance for each name on a list of Pargonian dead. Behind him, Tithon sat high and silent on his big warbird, a blue morning stripe painted from temple to temple. The Grayling twins rode at the rear, Hamor bareback on the blue-beaked crow she'd raised from a chick, and her sister, Trua, on a bird from Maladar, the last of that lost kingdom's vaunted running stock. After the high-arched bridge of the eye, gnolls followed the group at a distance. Elyonna watched them leap through the trees, their tall hats flapping. "What a waste of grace," T'Thon said, sitting in his saddle with his arms crossed. "If only gnolls weren't mindless beasts, I'd be impressed with their command of the canopy." "Maybe it's their bestial nature that makes them so sure of hand," Trua offered. "They're too stupid to doubt themselves. They don't fear falling, as thinking creatures do." "I'm only concerned with killing them," said Maru. "When will they attack?" "Bring your bloodlust to heel," Elyonna said, and the others fell into worshipful silence. All deserve mercy. In a ring of Oron ruins, the gnolls made their play. Maru's green gem burned bright as a torch as his blade carved gnoll flesh. T'Thon stood like a mountain, and his mace struck like lightning. Elyonna stopped the twins from ending the last gnoll's life. She held out her hand and wrapped the mad thing in a shield of light. The twins sheathed their blades and watched. "You are free," Elyonna told the gnoll. It charged the shield and gnashed its needle teeth. "Do you understand me?" The gnoll made a sound that could have been a word. Everyone leaned in to listen to its next utterances. They were snarls and hoots with no apparent meaning, but the gnoll seemed to look into Elyonna's eyes. It might have understood. When she dispelled the shield, the creature leaped into the trees and disappeared. "Will it just gather more of its kind to attack us again?" Hamor asked. "We'll see," Elyonna replied. The waning day saw the party gain the western eaves of Tearspring, and make camp on the yellow fields beyond. No more gnolls came from the growing shadows. The woods were quiet at their edge. Trua sang a lament for Pargon as night closed its mouth around their campfire. Elyonna added a verse for the fallen gnolls, and the others gawped as she sang, as though she were a statue with music ringing from it. The yellow fields went east to the borders of Vulera. Elyonna's party rode through a crystal blue morning into noon clouds and showers that, though they were cool, brought ash from Pargon. That kingdom was still burning. Elyonna could see the smoke even as the group rode past Vulera's westernmost watchtower. Griffins circled overhead. The ground hardened into scrub, and the party stopped in the rain to let their birds eat prairie flowers. Cloud-wrapped Mount Lore stood up like a gnoll's fang. It wasn't far now. They made camp on the Loren Fells, where white trees grew twisting back like dancers turned to bark mid-reel. Menhirs stood in the grass with pilgrims' offerings at their feet. Elyonna traced the inscrutable carvings on the menhirs' faces, while T'Thon made his mother's thistle stew. "We'll stay here with the birds," she told Maru as they walked the field of stones. "I know that's not what you want." "I know my duties, Skyborn," Maru replied. "I will obey." "How did you come to be my equerry, Maru?" Elyonna asked. "What brought you to me?" Maru stopped before a menhir and looked down at an offering bowl of flower heads and Rularan nesting idols. I wanted to work for the most beautiful being in the world, he said, not looking up. Elyonna of the infinite skies, wise and kind and perfect. I'd heard all the stories. Now he looked at Elyonna, and some of the innocence was gone from his eyes. In just 2 days, Maru had grown away from his earlier light. I hoped that some of what you are might become part of me, he continued. Is that wrong? Love can turn to need, Elyonna replied, and need can turn to hate. All the world loves you, and even those in other worlds. Are you saying I shouldn't? A griffin called from the shoulder of the mountain. Others answered, and the Loran fells rang with their clarion voices. No one else can govern how you feel, Maru, Elyonna replied, as the din waned. But mind what your heart holds. In the evening, fairies rose from the grass to flit about the menhirs. They bowed to Elyonna and brought her tiny musical instruments as gifts. That night, as they sat around a fire made brighter by Elyonna's magic, Thon regaled the party with a story of his days as a mercenary in Salamarine. Then Maru read his grim list from the first name to the last, and Elyonna led the others in meditation on what they were about to face. No extent of vengeance was sufficient to snatch souls from the throat of darkness. She thought her companions understood, but she couldn't be sure. Wise and kind though she knew she was, she couldn't see into them. She could only trust. Morning came cold. It held light in a hesitant hand, sorry it didn't have more to give. Clouds like continents hid the sky, and the fells were shadowless. Maru fed the hrows and checked that they were safe to wait where they were tied. Meanwhile, Elyonna and the rest of the party gathered at the wall of the mountain, where no pass opened into the forbidding rock. Now to the peak, Hamor said, and the dragon. Elyonna closed her eyes and summoned her magic. It swelled in her, giving her skin a bright blue glow. In her mind, she was above its deeps, looking down. It loved her, but not as Maru did. It was part of her, and it was separate. It had grown with her since the day she'd descended to the world. Now she stirred her magic to greater power, and it responded like an appendage. Wrapped in a blazing sapphire aura, Elyonna cried up at Mount Lore with the voice of a griffin. Winged shapes appeared above, peeling away from the mountain to circle the fells, calling replies. At last, a gold-backed griffin spiraled down to land on the fells, its great wings pounding and its beak half open. Elyonna let her spell dissipate and approached the griffin with her hands outstretched. It squawked and sat back on its haunches, brown wings flat against its back and its tail thrashing. Elyonna was afraid for an instant. The red eyes darted, and the dagger claws gouged the ground. The griffin could have ripped her apart with one snap of its bill, but it waited, and her fears slipped away. "Do you know me?" Elyonna asked. "Skyborn," the griffin replied, Its voice was like the blare of a silver trumpet. All know you. Even the most distant ears have heard your name. Mouths say it that speak naught else. And what is your name? Gaduma. The griffin tossed its enormous head. When it beat its wings, offerings blew away from their menhirs. You honor me, star child. With this, Gaduma bowed, and Elyonna took hold of his claw. You needn't, Gaduma, she said. Instead, carry us up to Balgora's den. Do you know the place? Gaduma straightened and curled his tail around his hind leg. The other griffins continued circling and calling amongst each other. You ask for danger, he said, cocking his head. I can't deliver you to your death. Do you believe, mighty Gaduma, Elyonna asked, that a mere dragon could kill me? Gaduma closed his eyes and put his head to his white feathered breast. Then he lay down and spread his wings on the grass. Elyonna and the others climbed onto his back and took handfuls of his luscious fur. Elyonna wondered what his mind was like. How did he see the world? She thought it a shame that she should never have a griffin's life. Have you seen Balgora recently? Trua asked as Gaduma stood and prepared to fly. I tried to avoid seeing her, the griffin said. Now hold on. Gaduma beat his wings and leaped from the fells into the morning air. His power was incredible. Each wing beat was like an explosion. The shock rattled Elyonna's teeth as she held on as tight as she could. Her knuckles went white with the effort. Hamor laughed behind her. After a long moment's flapping, Gaduma banked into a wide circle over the fells. At the mountain wall, he dug his claws into a spar of rock and launched himself up Mount Lore like an arrow. The ground sped away. Clouds split like water. Wild wind tugged Elyonna's braids straight. And then the peak was in view. The dragon's lair was a rip in the living rock, gaping far above the tree line. For miles around it, the bare stone was scorched black, and meltwater pooled in colossal claw marks. The desolation of Balgora, Gaduma said, pitching his voice above the roar of the wind. Her den is there. I shan't wait, Skyborn. I'm too afraid. Listen for my call, brave Gaduma, Elyonna replied, amplifying her voice with an effortless spell. We shall look for your coming when the dragon is dead. Gaduma circled toward the dragon's den. From beneath its entrance, a burned jut of stone pointed out over cold, empty height. There the griffin landed, and he shook gently to help Elyonna and company dismount. Then he hurried away, his huge wings beating up whirls of grit, and went careening down toward the cloud bank, where his kin were still circling. Elyonna slid her sword from its sheath. It rang, and the wind carried the clear sound away from the rip in the mountainside. The party approached the mouth of Balgora's den in a tight knot behind their skyborn leader. I knew Balgora a century ago, Elyonna said. Mim, the dragon hunter, brought her to me when she was but a fledgling. Mim was an idiot, Thon said. If anyone is to blame for Maladar and Pargon, added Hamor, it's him. Trua gave a nervous laugh and said, It's a pity he was eaten. I want to talk with her, Elyonna said. It's rare that any creature, no matter how twisted, breaks a promise to me. Weapons drawn, the party entered the dragon's den. The entire mountain peak was hollow. The walls were charred and scored. The stench was abhorrent. In the center of the chamber, where fat silver veins shimmered in the dark, Balgora's nest of wood and bones sat abandoned above an abyss of darkness. No dragon, Thon said. She hasn't been here in a long time, Elyonna replied. And she isn't coming back. We're deceived, said Hamor. Balgora is dead, said a voice from the nest. A person emerged from the sagging pile, small and slight, with a green gem at his throat. She kept her promise to you, Skyborn. You'll be relieved to hear that. What are you, Maru? Thon demanded. No Oron equerry, that's clear. Before Maru could reply, Thon charged. The grayling twins followed, blades flashing, trying to surround the betrayer. With a wave of his hand, Maru flung them aside. Thon's mace clattered across the floor and fell into the chasm beyond the nest. It was only because of Hamor's fast action that Trua didn't precipitate it into that bottomless black. No, Maru said. You, Elyonna. You kill me. Elyonna sheathed her sword. I won't, she said. You should know by now. You should have guessed what I'd say. Maru's eyes widened. A smile spread too large across his face. He fell to his knees, his body quaking, and bat wings burst from his back. A tail lashed from between his legs, its tip a spear point. Flame grew in Maru's chest and dripped from his jaws as they elongated. Elyonna remembered the hot wind in her face in the Bay of Frogs. Was Pargon still burning even now? Thon and the twins recovered. Hamor and Trua rushed to plunge their swords into Maru's sides as his clothes fell apart and his skin became impenetrable scales. Thon went to protect Elyonna, but she put him behind her. Tell me why, Maru, Elyonna commanded. She held out her hand. Her magic roiled within her, and light grew in her palm until it was so bright in the chamber that she could see ancient gnomish marks on the walls. Maru's transformation progressed unhindered. The grayling twins fell back from him as he swelled to enormous size and began to beat his jade-green wings. At last, he spit a gount of flame toward Elyonna, and she stopped it in midair against her outstretched hand. The walls began to groan. The disused nest quaked apart and scattered into the crevasse. The gnomish marks glowed in answer to Elionna's tremendous power. In her mind, she was clothed in her magic, at one with it. She was at one with everything. She felt every light year of space and every mind on every world that wondered what waited among the reachless stars. Fire licked her hand and left no burns. Maru pushed with all he had, but for all his hate had grown in secret, he was still too young for this horror. Love gone mad had blinded him. The flames curled back and splintered. In their hunger to consume Elyonna, they frayed into wild tendrils that lashed in vain against her magic. Maru shrank as he spent all his strength, and his magic left him. He screamed, and the turning flames of his hatred consumed him. Once more a man, he burned for an instant, and then his corporeal shell vanished. His soul blew away, a violet cloud of sparking motes, and Maru was no more. The cavern dimmed. Darkness returned in perfect silence. Elyonna sat on her heels, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Thawne embraced her. A skinwalker, he said into her wind-tossed hair. A sorcerer. Why? Hamor asked as she and her sister knelt beside Elyonna. He didn't intend to say, Trua replied. He coveted, Elyonna said, and called it love. What did he think he could have? Thawne asked. He had to have known he couldn't stand against the Skyborn. Elyonna shook her head. I wish I could have seen into him, she said. Maru was Maru, forever closed. Maru the deceiver. I am as I must ever be, only Elyonna. Gaduma and his brothers carried Elyonna's party back to the Loren Fells. There they found that Maru had cut the Hraus free of their ties. Nonetheless, the loyal birds had remained where they were. Elyonna and the others rested in the foothills until nightfall, when they built a fire and fell asleep, listening to Gaduma's stories. Dawn brought mist that lingered above the grass. Fairies sang as they carried dewdrops back to their acorn houses. The griffins returned to their roosts, and Hamor lit an incense cone before a menhir. For Maru, she said. Elyonna looked across the fells. Her magic moved with the mist around her feet. Beyond the southern fields, Rulera's capital domes rose shining in the new day. In the west, there were no more pillars of smoke. Now to Pargon, where we should have been, she said. We've good yet to do. And that is the end of The Dragon of Lore. It was fun to write. I hope it was as fun to hear. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video.